Please purchase a personal license to remove this message. Ith advent of the plafé as humanity by gasping in the agonies of death, God raised up Prophet Muhammad to bring life back to humanity and deliver it from darkness into light. Says the Holy Quran, a book witty we I have revealed 1 mto in order that our 1011 might 11 lead mankind rf the depths of darkness ifulfo light by the Leo of Clear Lord to tire way, f him the exalted I11 power, worthy fall praise, Brahim 14:1 The Prophet broke the fetters of ignorance and superstition and invited men to a servitude that released them from all forms of bondage. He restored to them the legitimate comforts of life from which they had deprived themselves under false ethical and spiritual notions. That book of Islam says Roar Lium numbs them what is just a 11 jinbids them what is evil, he 1000 them as lao, fi, what is, good and pure mibits them frmn what is bad all, imp 11 re, he relieves then 1 jiun their heavy b11 rdwsa 11 d cs relieve from the yokes that arc 11 po 11 the 111. Al Raftr 57 The Prophet's advent gave to humanity a new life, a new light, a new faith, a new warmth, a new society and a new culture. It was the 34 Islam and the world beginning of a new era in human history, marking the commencement of the real mission of man on earth. The blind and the seeing are not alike, nor are the depths f the darkness and the light, nor are the chilly shade and the, nil heat f the s1111, nor are alike those that are living mid those that are dead. Al-Fatir 35:19-22 Yawning between Islam and ignorance, there was a deep and wide chasm. Yet, under the inspired leadership of the Prophet, the world jumped across this chasm and passed from ignorance to Islam with an alacrity that is without parallel in history. In the following pages we shall see how this glorious miracle was accomplished. The era of ignorance a reappraisal. It must be clear from the preceding chapter that the world at the time of the Prophet's advent was like a house hit by a severe earthquake. All that was in it had turned upside down, while large spaces had been bereft of everything and made completely desolate. In this confusion man had forgotten himself, he had lost his self-respect to the extent that he was shamelessly prostrating himself before stones, trees, and water, before all the helpless manifestations of nature. He could not comprehend even simple, everyday truths. His intellect was grounded. He was so confused and his senses had become so one-vert that he could not distinguish the real from the unreal, right from wrong, and truth from falsehood. Vice was seen as virtue. Wolves, so to speak, were appointed to tend sheep, aggressors were allowed to act as arbitrators. The sinful and the wicked lived in peace and enjoyed plenty, while the righteous and the upright were condemned to privation and suffering. Cunning and deceit passed for wisdom and resourcefulness, while wisdom was considered foolishness. Drinking, gambling, usury, and plunder had become the order of the advent of the Prophet. 35 day. Daughters were killed at birth. God's wealth was in the grime of the king's palms, and human beings their bondsmen. Clergymen had raised themselves to a position of divinity. They grew fat on the wealth of others whom they deliberately deceived for their own selfish purposes. Precious qualities which God had bestowed upon man were wantonly misused. Courage and strength had become a means of cruelty and oppression, and wastefulness stood for generosity, arrogance passed for self-respect, and artfulness for sagacity. The sole purpose of the intellect was thought to be to plan crimes and invent new ways of hideous debauchery and vulgar extravagance. For a long time the most valuable of all materials, the human material, had been rotting. It had not had the good fortune to come to the notice of a master craftsman who should have prepared from it the right mold of civilization. Where there should have been organized communities of men, there were untended flocks of human cattle. Politics was as unrestrained as a wild animal, and power was like a naked sword in the hands of one who had lost his senses on account of heavy drinking and who was using it against himself and against everybody else. Ineffective half measures. Every section of that degenerate society cried out for the undivided attention of a reformer. An ordinary reform one acting according to his own whims, and without prophetic inspiration or divine guidance, might have concentrated his energies on correcting a single social pathological condition, and, even then, he might not have succeeded. Human nature is complex, abounding in labyrinths and mysterious backdoors, and, once it is misguided or deflected from its natural course, it cannot be given a new lease of life by removing just one defect. It required a complete overhaul, a thorough reconditioning. If the plant of godliness was to thrive on human soil, the entire undergrowth of ungodliness had first to be weeded out. There was no other option. The correction of a single moral defect in human society calls for the 36 slam and the world dedication of a reformer's entire life. Sometimes many men spend their lifetime combating a moral fault or a social abuse without being rewarded with any measure of success. Take, for example, drinking alcohol. When this habit becomes widespread in a nation, its roots go deep into the collective subconscious, and a whole army of sensuous delights grows along with the habit. Can this be overcome by mere moral exhortation or by punitive legislation alone? No, only a fundamental psychological shift, a radical change in the social and moral outlook of society can eradicate it. Any ochre course of action will only drive the habit underground and make it more pernicious. The difference between a prophet and a leader: had the prophet been a political leader, the ideal action for him to take would have been to weld Arabia into one country and the Arab tribes into one nation, with himself at their head. Abu Utbah and all his other relentless opponents would have readily accepted his leadership. They had already demonstrated their confidence in him by appointing him to arbitrate in Makkah's most dangerous dispute. 75 Utbah had definitely stated that, if he so desired, the Quraysh were willing to make him their king. After he had risen to power in Arabia, he could have led his splendid horsemen into Persia and Rome and brought these under his control. And, in case it was strategically unwise to fight against the Romans and the Iranians simultaneously, what was there to prevent him from overrunning the neighboring countries of Abyssinia and the Yemen? However, the prophet had not been raised to substitute one evil for another, to condemn an injustice in one place and condone it elsewhere. He had not been sent to erect the mansion of Arab glory upon the ruins of the hopes and yearnings of other nations, to emancipate men from the subjugation of the Romans and Iranians and to place them under subjugation of the descendants of Adnan and Qahran. The prophet was not a political leader. Il was a preacher of the divine word, a warner, and a dearer of glad tidings. He was the tidy Advent QF, the prophet 37 lustrous lamp. He had come to emancipate men from the worship of their fellow men by calling on them to submit to the one and real Lord, the Almighty God. Had come to rescue humanity from the dungeon of petty desires by working out its evolution in the boundless spaces of the heavens and the earth, and to deliver it from the tyranny of decayed religions to the bounty of Islam, to check evil and promote good deeds and to prohibit what was dirty and unhealthy and sanction what was clean and wholesome. He, therefore, did not address himself to any particular country or community, and he made the whole human race his concern. It was only right that he should begin his mission with Arabia as, being the darkest place on earth during the darkest age of human history, it was in dire need of the first rays of light. To this, the central place that Makkah occupied on the map of the then known world, together with its tradition of political freedom, made it an ideal base for a movement which stood for liberty, peace, and universal brotherhood. The Arabs also possessed certain inborn virtues that made them fit for being instrumental in spreading the teaching of Islam throughout the world. The Prophet was not one of those reformers who content themselves with striving against a few moral abuses of their age and succeed in eradicating them for the time being, or depart from the world without having accomplished anything at all. 7 Unraveling the knot of human destiny. The Holy Prophet applied the right solution to the problem of human nature. It was the problem which had defied solution at the hands of all Reform 1 ERS before him. He began by entreating men to believe in God and to bring down all false gods from the pedestal of divinity. O people, he declared, say, there is no God but one God and you shall prosper. Ignorance about Islam. This thunderous proclamation caused a stir among the ranks of paganism and, in an instant, paganism was up in arms against this simple human truth. 38 Islam and the world and the leaders among them forthwith said, go forth and stick to your gods. F.ir This is truly a thing designed against you. Holy Quran, Ad 38:6 The ghastly deeds of crime and cruelty perpetrated on the Muslims by the enemies of truth are preserved in the pages of history. They show that Islam had found its mark and had struck at the very root of unbelief. The citadel of darkness had been stormed, and the beleaguered forces rushed forth to fight to the bitter end. But the Prophet did not waver. In the hurricane of hatred and persecution he stood firm like a rock. He told his uncle who had brought him up since childhood, O my uncle, if they place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left to force me to renounce my work, verily I will not desist until God makes manifest his work or I perish in the effort. 77 For 13 years he remained in Mecca, resolute and steadfast, insisting on belief in divine unity, his messengership, resurrection, and last judgment. His faith in his mission was never shaken, not even for a moment. He did not compromise with untruth. He was convinced that the majestic message that had been vouchsafed to him alone held the answer to all the unsolved problems of humanity. The first Muslims, the whole of Arabia, became hostile to the Prophet. It needed the heart of a lion to accept his mission. It meant treading the path of fire and walking into the jaws of death. Yet, some brave souls among the Quraysh responded to the divine call. Theirs was not a hurried decision. They knew what they were doing. There were no worldly considerations to prompt them. They deliberately shut the doors to worldly comforts and luxury. They had heard the call to faith, and the world had shrunk for them. Sleep had gone out of their eyes and their soft beds had turned into beds of thorns. Truth had dawned upon them, and now there could be no turning back. They knew in their age arts that there could be no peace for them until they had declared their faith. 111 Advent, F. The Prophet 39 In God and His Messenger. So they all decided to go to the Prophet and accept the faith he preached. The Prophet lived in their part of town, only a short distance away. But the hatred of the Quraysh made the way to him so long and so perilous that to traverse it was like undertaking a long and hazardous journey. It was safer by far to take a trade caravan to Syria or the Yemen, eluding the barbarous highwaymen, than to meet the Prophet in Mecca itself. Yet, they did go to him, took at his hand the oath of allegiance to God and his messenger and pledged their lives to stand by him. They took a tremendous risk. Severe hardships and unsparing trials would inevitably beleaguer their lives, but they were prepared for the worst. They listened to the Holy Quran, which said, Do think that they will be left alone on saying, We believe, and that they will not be tested? I.e. did test those before them, and God will certainly know those who are true from those who are false. Al-Ankabiyat 29:2-3. And they also heard the following divine commandment, or, do ye think that ye shall enter the garden of bliss without such trials as came to those who passed away before you? I.e. they encountered suffering and adversity and were so shaken in spirit that even the Isenger and those who belie one jet along with him cried out, Helhen will come the help of Goyal. J.ht Verily, the help, F God is two ways near at hand. Al-Lakara 2:14 Finally, what they had dreaded happened and the Quraysh emptied the quiver of their wrath. Not one arrow was left unused. But the believers remained steadfast. They said, "This is what Allah and His one messenger had promised, verily, they, feared Allah and His wes anger is Tni al-Azab 3y22, and it reinforced them internally and strengthened 40 Islam and Nr and wold them in their resolve. The more they were quoted, the stronger did their determination grow. From this furnace of trial they emerged as pure as gold." The religious and spiritual education of the companions. At the same time the Prophet supplied the companions with the spiritual guidance of the Quran and looked after religious education. He made them bow 5 times a day before the Creator and the Preserver of the worlds with cleanliness of body, humility of heart and concentration of mind. Day by day, they increased in stature, morally and spiritually, and rid themselves of shallow, earthly aspirations. Their love for the Lord of the world increased daily. Still, the companions were tough since war was their old pastime. Their history was full of bloody episodes like those of Basils and Dabda'is and Gabra. The memory of the war of Fajar was still fresh in their minds. But the Prophet kept their warlike temperament under control. Their native arrogance had yielded before the sublimity of their faith. The Prophet I commanded them to stay their hands and establish prayer 78, and they obeyed him. They were like wax in his hands. Without a semblance of cowardice, they passively endured what no people in the world had ever endured. Not a single instance is recorded in the pages of history in which a Muslim raised his arm in the defense of his own person or resorted to retaliation or went back to his old ways of ignorance. In Medina, when that enmity of the Quraysh exceeded all limits, God allowed the Muslims to migrate to Madinah where Islam had already found its way. In Medina, the one Tlakan and the Madinite Muslims fraternized with each other. They had nothing in common except the new faith. Blood was still dripping from the swords of the Aus and the Hazraj. They had not yet removed from their clothes the stains of blood revived in the battle of Buletin Adh. In these circumstances, Islam sowed the seeds of affection in their hearts for one another and brought about a nick advent, the Prophet for brotherhood that would never have been possible among blood brothers. The ties established between the Ansar and the Muhajirs 79 were stronger even than the ties of blood. This new community, which consisted of the emigrants from Vilaka and the helpers from Medina, was the nucleus of a splendid Islamic nation and the Commonwealth one of Islam. It was born at a time when the world wavered precariously between life and death. Its birth tipped the scales in favor of life. To strengthen this community was indispensable for the survival of mankind. For this very reason, when God stressed the forging of brotherly bonds between the Ansar and Muhajirs, He gave the warning, if you will not do so, there will great Corr 11 Go 11 and mischief on the earth. Holy Quran, Al-Anfal 873. The highest pinnacle of development, the religious training of the companions, continued in Medina under the supervision of the Prophet, who explained the conception and purpose of religion and fostered among them the virtues of introspection and self-censorship, love of learning, and anxiety for the afir. The companions were seized by an overwhelming urge for self-effacement in the path of God. So easy had it become for them to turn their backs on worldly attachments that in 10 years they set forth more than 100 times on jihad, 27 times in the company of the Prophet. The verses of the Quran, as revealed through the Prophet, brought into force numeracy 01 mans with regard to their personal conduct, possessions, and families. These were quite new and by no means easy to observe. But the companions had become so accustomed to surrendering themselves unquestioningly to the will of God that they experienced no difficulty in complying. Once the Gordian knot of disbelief had been cut, it was easy to unfasten the other knots that bound them. And once the Prophet had opened their hearts to Islam, he did not have to struggle at each step to make them reject wrong and accept right. They entered into the new faith with heart and soul and submitted themselves without demur to what the Prophet 42 Islam and the world decreed. They unhesitatingly confessed before the Prophet such crimes as were not known to anyone except themselves. If they committed any crime, they voluntarily submitted themselves for punishment. Many of them actually had wine cups in their harn when the Quranic injunction against the use of intoxicants was revealed, but the word of God came between them and their cups. They threw away the cups at once and broke their wine barrels so that the Dardins of Medina literally overflowed with their contents. Thus, when they had attained to the highest pinnacle of moral development and become proof against the inducements of Satan and of their own baser self, when they had learned to prefer the future good to the immediate good and had been transformed into lovers of the hereafter even while living in this world, when neither poverty could be a barrier in their path nor could riches make them vain, when they had become meek, yet unbending before power, and when they had come to be the dispensers of justice among men even though it might go against themselves, their own kith and kin, God made the whole world subservient to them and appointed them the defenders of the faith. The Prophet nominated them his successors and went to join the Most High, happy in the triumphant fulfillment of his one-trillion and in that belief that he had left his charge in Hangsib that would falter. History's most remarkable revolution, the Rnidi revolution wrought by the Prophet among the Arabs, which through them produced a new and lasting impression on all the nations of the globe, was unique in all respects. It was a most extraordinary event in human history, yet there was nothing about it that could not be explained rationally. Let us study the character, the scope, and the influence of this great revolution on the destiny of the human race. The fruits of faith. During the pre-Islamic era, people generally worshipped inanimate objects which could neither help nor grant their petitions and had, in the advent of the Prophet 43 fact, been created merely to serve their needs. Hence, there was no real moral enthusiasm, no genuine spirituality in their religions. The god of their conception was an artisan who had retired into a corner after finishing his job. They believed that he had bequeathed his kingdom to those whom he had adorned with the mantle of divinity, and now it was they who controlled the affairs of the universe. They lacked any spiritual understanding of God. They did know of him as the creator of the universe, and any awareness was akin to the knowledge of a historian who, when he is asked who constructed a certain building, replies that it was built by such and such a king, but the mention of the king's name neither inspires awe in his heart, nor makes any solemn impression on his mind. They had no intimate consciousness of the divine attributes and, consequently, their hearts did not bear the imprint of God's glory or love. The Greeks had expounded what was largely a negative definition of God. Their definition did not entail the positive virtues connected with his name such as benevolence, compassion, mercifulness, and omniscience. It did prove the first cause, but divested it of knowledge and will, and set forth such hypothetical premises and theories as were derogatory to divine dignity. But no system of culture or faith has ever thrived on negative foundations. The Greek philosophers had, accordingly, ended up destroying the spirit of religion and making it a rigmarole of empty ceremonies, sports, and festivals. The Muslims in general and the Arabs in particular rejected this vague and sickly religiousness and attained a faith which was at once intense and profound and which permeated through every fiber of their existence. They pledged their faith in God who has excellent attributes, who is the most exalted, the most magnificent and the master of the day of judgment. Says the Holy Quran, God is he besides whom there is no other, O.D., the Sovereign, the Ijoli One, the source of peace and perfection, the guardian of faith, the preserver of safety, the exalted in tight, the irresistible, the supreme. Glory to God High is 44 Islam and the world above the partners they attribute to him. He is the creator, the evolver, the bestower of forms and colors. To him belong the most beautiful names. High whatever is in the heavens and on earth, doth declare his praises and glmy, and he is the exalted in fight, the wise. Al-Ashra 59:23, 24. He is the God who is the creator and the preserver of the universe, who rewards with paradise and chastises with hell, who swells or shrinks the subsistence of whomsoever he likes, who is the knower of all that is hidden in the heavens and the earth, and who knows the stealth of the eyes and the secrets of the hearts, and is the embodiment of beauty and sublimity, strength and splendor, perfection and beneficence. This solemn conviction produced a miraculous transformation among the early followers of Islam. Whoever affirmed his faith in the one transcendent God and testified to La ilaha illallah experienced a sudden change in himself. The innermost recesses of his soul were lit up with the sublime radiance of God consciousness, the spirit and the flesh in him ceased to be the enemies of one another. He achieved equilibrium within himself, and extraordinary feats of courage, endurance, and faith were performed by the believer. Self-criticism. This faith was a wonderful source of moral training. It generated among its followers an arousing strength of will, self-criticism and justice, as nothing can help overcome the inducing one ants of the self so successfully as a living faith in the omnipresence of God. If anyone succumbed to evil or negative urges and fell into error, even unobserved, he would immediately confess to the Prophet and undergo the severest punishment willingly to save himself from divine displeasure. A number of such incidents have been handed down to us by reliable historians, such as that of Mu'az ibn Malik Islami. One day he approached the Holy Prophet and said, "O Prophet of God, Itl1 vent of the Prophet 45 have been guilty of adultery, and I beg of you to cleanse me." The Prophet sent him away, but he returned the next day and repeated again, sent him away and inquired from the confession. The Prophet his family v'hather the balance of his mind had been disturbed. The relatives of 111Z stated that, as far as they knew, there was nothing abnormal in his behavior. When Mu'az came to him for the third time, again inquired about his mental condition, and the Prophet ivs gave the same answer. They would not think of telling a lie to save the life of a relative. Mu'az, too, would not shrink back. He appeared before the Prophet and confessed his guilt. For the fourth ordered him to be stoned to death time. Then, at fast, the Prophet according to Islamic law. 8. A similar case was that of a woman named Gamadiah. She, too, was guilty of adultery and wanted to be cleansed so that she might not have to rise with the stain of sin on the day of reckoning. When she appeared before the Prophet again on the second day, having been sent away on the first, she earnestly said, "Why do you send me away like Mu'az? I am pregnant too, and this proves my guilt beyond a replied shadow of doubt. Then go away now, Rhe Prophet come after your child is born." She went away and waited. When the period of waiting was over and she delivered of the child, she again holding her baby in her MNS. Here approached the Holy Prophet. "Is my child," she said, but once more she had to go away, for the Prophet commanded her to go away and nurse the child until it was weaned. "Bring it to me," he said, "when it begins to feed other than from the breast." When the child was weaned, Gamadiah returned to the Prophet with her child, the child holding a piece of bread in it, tiny hand, proving that it no longer needed to be nursed from the breast. "Here I am, messenger of God," the woman declared. "Now I am free. My child is weaned." The Prophet then placed the child in the saray of a Muslim and ordered that the sentence of death by stoning be carried out. A pit was dug and Gamadiah was buried in it up to her waist. Then he was stoned. As Khalid ibn al-Walid hurled a stone at her and blood gushed from her body, some drops of it fell 46 Islamlid the world upon his clothes. Recoiling, Khalid uttered uncomplimentary remarks about the woman, which the Holy Prophet heard. "No, Khalid, no," the Prophet admonished him, by the one in whose hand is my life, she has offered such penitence that if the Octroi official 82 did it, even he would be forgiven by God. After she was dead, funeral and prayers were said over her bier by the command of the Prophet. 8. She was buried. 3. Honesty and trustworthiness. Virtues such as honesty and trustworthiness developed in the early JV Muslims as the natural fruits of a sense of living belief in the omnipresence of the absolute God. EVCN when alone and unnoticed, or in any other situation wherein they could easily transgress the bounds of religious conduct, fear of God kept the Muslims under rigid control. It is related in Tariq Taharf that after the victory of Ma'in, v. Hen the Muslims were collecting the booty, one of them brought something he had come across and deposited it with the treasurer. It was so enormously valuable that those who saw it were astounded. They had never seen such a valuable treasure before. They began to question him. "Are you sure you have not held back a part of it?" "By God," he replied, "had I wished I could have misappropriated the whole lot without any of you being the wiser." This straightforward reply made a deep impression and they felt that they were in the presence of an extraordinary man. They begged him to disclose his name, but he declined. "I can't tell you my name," he said, "because you will then start praising me, while all praise is for Allah. I am well content with whatever he bestows as a reward." When he departed, they sent a man after him to find out who he was. Then it was Diskof, read that he was Amir ibn Abdks. 84. The eschewing of man-made gods. The belief in one God, the sovereign Lord of the University raised the heads of Muslims so high that now they could not be made to bow. 171. Advent F. The Prophet 4:7 before anyone but the Almighty. Mirroring in their heart, as they did, the glory of the most glorious, the glitter of worldly grandeur made no ss 10n. Abu Musa says that when he reached the court of the Negus along with other Muslim emigrants, he found that Amr ibn Allah was sitting on the emperor's right, Umarah on his left, and the priests were phoning a double row in the front. Amr and Umarah informed the emperor that the Muslims would not kneel before him. The priests insisted that they should do so, upon which Jafar, may Allah be pleased with him, unhesitatingly said, "We, Muslims, kneel before God alone and before no one else." 85. Rib ibn Amir was once sent by Sad ibn Abi Waqtas, may Allah be pleased with him, as his envoy to Rustam, the commander Ir-1 chief of Iran. Rustam received him in a grand hall which was filled with magnificent carpets. The commander-in-chief, wearing a crown and robes which sparkled with gems, sat on a throne. Ribai, in contrast, was very poorly attired. He was dressed Ir-1 rags and carried a shield too small for his size. His horse was also of a small breed, on which he rode straight towards Rustam, the pony trampling the costly carpets under its hoofs. Approaching the throne, he dismounted, tied the reins of the horse to a bolster and started to walk up to Rustam, still wearing his helmet and arms. The officers of the court remonstrated against him, saying that he should at least take off his helmet before going into the presence of the commander-in-chief. But R.1b I retorted, "I have come at your request and not of my own accord. I am willing to go back if you do not want me." At this point, Rustam intervened and told his officers to let him come as he wished. Ribai then proceeded, leaning upon his lance, and piercing the carpets with it at each step. The people asked about the purpose of his visit. He said, "We have been sent by Allah to deliver whom He pleases from the overlordship of His slaves i.e. men to His own overlordship, and from the narrow confines of this world to the boundlessness of the next, and from the oppressive MSS of other religions to the fairness and justice of Islam." 86-48 Islam and the world. Rare courage. Enthusiasm for the afterlife endowed the Muslims with almost superhuman courage. Worldly aims and interests having ceased to have any significance in their eyes, they advanced towards the ultimate goal of paradise with great ardency. It is reported that as Ardas ibn an-Nadr, may Allah be pleased with him, advanced on the enemy at a critical moment in the Battle of Ul-Rnd, he met Sad ibn Muadh, to whom he said, "By God, Sad, I can feel the sweet fragrance of paradise coming from the direction of the Mount of Uhud." With these words he rushed into the heart of the battle. Sad said that when the dead body of Anas was uncovered from the battlefield, there were more than 80 wounds on it. The infidels had literally cut him to pieces. As a result, only his sister could recognize his CRNPSE. 87 In the battle off Badr, the Prophet was urging the LV1 Muslims on to greater effort. When he said, "March forward to paradise, the extensiveness of which is as the extensiveness of the heavens and the earth," Umair ibn al-Imam cried out, "O Prophet of God, is it really that MNCH extensive?" The Prophet replied, "Yes. Do you doubt it?" "El doubt not," said Umair, "El only wished that El attained it." "You will?" the Prophet replied. Umair had taken out some dates and began to eat them. But the opening of the prospect of paradise before his mind would not let him eat. Was it not foolish to waste one's time on such trifles when heaven was beckoning? He filing away the dates and rushed into the tlwanic of the battle. His heart's desire was soon fulfilled. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Musa Ash'ari narrated that on a certain field of battle his father was recounting how the Prophet had said that the gates of paradise were under the shadow of the sword, when a man, his clothes in tatters, stepped forward and asked whether he himself had heard that from the Prophet. Abu Bakr's father Abu Musa Ash'ari, may Allah be pleased with him, replied that it was so. On hearing this, the man went back and took leave of his friends. He unsheathed his sword, broke the sheath into pieces and took the field against the enemy. He was subsequently killed. 89 The advent of the Prophet. 49 Amr ibn al-Jamfl, who was lame, had 4 sons. They used to accompany the Holy Prophet whenever he set out on Eid. When the Prophet was leaving for Amr wanted to join him, but his sons were opposed to it on account of his physical disability and old age. Finding them adamant, Amr sought the help of the Prophet. "My sons dissuade me from going with you," he said, "while it is my desire that I walk in paradise with my impaired leg." The Prophet explained that the jihad was not binding on him. At the same time, he did not like Amr's sons standing in their father's way in the holy cause upon which he had set his heart. So he said to them, "Why don't you let him go? God may grant him martyrdom." The sons agreed and Amr went to join the holy war and was killed. 9 Shaddad ibn al-Had says that on a journey a Bedouin came to the Prophet and attached himself to his party after embracing Islam. The Prophet instructed a companion to take good care of him. When the campaign off Khaybr took place, the Prophet gave a share of the booty to the man, but as he was not present as he was shepherding the cattle of the Muslims, it was kept with a companion who gave it to him on his return in the evening. The Bedouin took the booty to the Prophet and inquired as to what it was. The Prophet told him that it was his share of the spoils, upon which he said, "But El did not join you for it," and pointing towards his throat he added, "I joined to be pierced by an arrow here." The Prophet replied, "God will fulfill your wish if you are true in your affair with Hern." Then another battle took place in which he was killed. When his course was pointed out to the Prophet, he remarked, "His affair with God was true, so God too innate high one and true." 9 Implicit surrender. The unruly Arabs, who were so lawless in their ways, surrendered themselves so absolutely to the guidance of the faith that it was not possible for them to infringe the divine law. They accepted the sovereignty of God in its fullest sense. In peace and in war, in joy and in sorrow, in every relationship of life, at each tum of affairs and in the 50 Islam and world minutest details of their concerns they looked to his guidance and help and carried out his commands without the slightest demur. They had known paganism, having been born and brought up in it. They could, therefore, fully appreciate the value of Islam and understand that Islam meant the replacement of one mode of life by another, leaving the anarchy of desire for the rule of God. Before Islam, they were at war with God, now they were his willing slaves. There could be no room for one's personal opinion after the word of God had come. To disobey the Prophet and, to dispute with him, to take one's case to a court other than the one in which the law of God dispensed, to give priority to one's family tradition over faith, these things were out of the question. They rejected paganism 11 toto and entered wholeheartedly into a new and fuller existence. FAC, Lala ibn Umar al-Laythi once planned to assassinate the Prophet during the Ta'if II of the Kaaba. As FAC, Lala drew near him, the Prophet inquired, "Is it you, Fadila?" "Yes, it is I, Prophet of God," he replied. "Tell me," the Prophet and I asked, "with what intention have you come?" "There is nothing to tell," replied FAC, Lala, "I was only remembering God." The Prophet smiled and placed his hand over FAC, Lala's heart. The peace of FAC, Lala's here wa.s reason read. He, afterward, would say that as soon as the hand was lifted, the Prophet appeared to be so handsome, as if God had not created anything in the world more beautiful than he. On his return, Fadila met his mistress who invited him to chat, but he declined. He said that there could be no scope for such a thing after one had submitted to Alam. 93 True knowledge. The prophets had imparted to man the true knowledge of God's existence and his attributes and actions. They had laid the foundations upon which man could erect the binding of his own spiritual conduct without getting involved in fruitless metaphysical discussions on being and knowing. But man heeded not. Instead of being grateful for divine guidance, he allowed his thought to drift aimlessly. He 11 Advent QF. The Prophet 5 behaved like an explorer who, setting aside the geographical charts, tries to scale every height, fathom every depth and measure every distance on his own. The result of such endeavors can at best be a few sketchy notes and incomplete, random hints. So when the people tried to reach God with the help of reason alone and without the light of the Prophet's teachings, their knowledge of God consisted of little else besides random thoughts, conflicting theories, and haphazard conclusions. The companions of Prophet Muhammad Ahmad were twice blessed in this respect because, by giving themselves up to his guidance, they were spared the pointless quest of speculative theology regarding the existence and nature of God and were left free to devote their energies to productive learning. They served as the guardians of the revealed word. Consequently, they were able to retain the substance of faith while others only skirted its shadow. A single humanity. The Islamic concept of God as the creator, nourisher, and sustainer of all peoples and nations and the universal scope of the ministry of Prophet Muhammad demolished all barriers of blood, color and geography between man and welded mankind into one family. In Islam all men formed, as it were, a single humanity. They were members of the same family, being the children of the same father Adam. An Arab had no superiority over a non-Arab and a 11011 Arab had no superiority over an Arab. The most honored was the most righteous. The Prophet said emphatically, "O people, verily, God has removed from you the blemish of ignorance and the pride of birth. There are but two classes of men tl10se who are righteous and God-fearing and honorable in the eyes of God, and those who are wicked and sinful and dishonorable in his eyes." 94 Typical of his teachings was the advice he gave to Abu Dhar, May Allah be pleased with him. Look here, you are neither greater than, nor superior to, anyone except, of course, in case you excel him in virtue. 9552 Islam and the world. Typical also was the affirmation he used to repeat to his Creator daily during the late night prayers: I testify that all men are brothers. 96 Everything that tended to divide humanity into factions and groups was severely condemned by the Prophet. He who lives in factionalism is not one of us. He who dies in factionalism is not one of us. He who fights for factionalism is not one of us. 97 Once, on the battlefield, a Aliojir slapped an Iri, upon which the Niri cried out, O N1R. Following his example, the Afuijir, Mo, shouted, O Kafahijir. The Prophet at once checked them. Leave these parochial slogans, he said, these are filthy. 98 The Prophet abolished the old tribal notion of kinship that demanded one remain loyal to one's brother whether he was the oppressor or the oppressed. In his view, helping a kinsman in an unjust cause was like trying to hold back by the tail a calm determined pawn jumping into the well. 99 He succeeded in establishing a classless society in which the high and the low, the rich and the poor, the white and the colored were united in one single brotherhood. Agile sections of the people readily cooperated and stood like one man in the hour of need. Women, when the trusts of God in the hands of men, vives had their rights over husbands, as husbands had their rights over wives. Social responsibility. The Muslims were charged with a strong sense of responsibility. Their minds had matured and they conducted themselves as responsible members of their families, their professions, their faith, and the entire society. They were the helpers of truth, they acted by mutual consultation, they obeyed the head of the state, the Caliph, wholeheartedly and overtly as well as covertly, but only as long as he remained loyal to the divine commandments. There is no loyalty unto the created which involves disloyalty unto the Creator. Ru was an essential dictum of their polity. The revenues of the state, which until then filled the private purses of the rulers, were confided in God and spent as approved by him. The position of the Caliph was like that of an orphan. The advent of the Prophet 53 Gwarklian, he took from the public funds only what was necessary for his sustenance in case he did not have an income of his own, otherwise he accepted no payment or reward. Ownership of land, too, was vested in God, and they believed that they would be called upon to answer before him for every inch of it held by them. A civic conscience. Centuries of ignorance and oppression had brought the common folk down to the level of animals, who mutely submitted to the many social wrongs to which they were subjected. In the righteous and democratic environment of Islam, the civic sense of the people was aroused, and the Islamic society came to possess a social conscience. Social responsibility was hammered into human consciousness by Islam as a religious demand. The real purpose of love, the noble instinct of love, to whose credit lie many outstanding achievements in history, had, before Islam, been rendered dormant. Things had come to such a state that it was now understood only in the context of the transient manifestations of beauty. For many years, there had not appeared anyone who could, by the appeal of his personality and the exquisiteness of his character, claim the unqualified devotion of his fellow men and then divert it into the right channel. The world found such a man in Prophet Muhammad, in whom God had assembled all that was adorable in a human being. Eyewitness accounts reveal that whoever came into the presence of the Holy Prophet was instantaneously overawed, while those who came to know him were bewitched. His admirers reported that they had not seen the like of him anywhere in the world. Hearts were drawn to him as if they had been waiting all their lives to be drawn by the magnetism of his personality. History cannot provide a single instance of anyone meeting with such love, obedience, and respect as he inspired in his people. 54 Islam and the world. Exceptional devotion. Cited Tao are some instances which illustrate the exceptional devotion of the Prophet's companions. One day Abi Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, was assaulted by the enemies of the faith at Makkah. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, in particular, beat him so severely that his face swelled until it became difficult to recognize him. He was carried home in an unconscious condition by Banu Taym. But so ardent was his love for the Prophet that the first thing he did on regaining consciousness towards the evening was to inquire about the Prophet's welfare. "How is the Prophet of God?" he asked through his swollen lips. His attendants felt greatly piqued and they began to scold him for showing so much concern for one who, in their opinion, was the sole cause of his misfortune. But he persisted in his inquiry, and when his mother, Care, brought him nourishment, he refused to accept it until he had received news about the Prophet. Care assured him that she knew nothing about his friend. He then asked her to go and inquire from Jamil, the daughter of Khattab, but the latter was so terrified that she would not admit that she knew the Prophet. "I do not know who is Muhammad ibn Abdullah or Abu Bakr," she declared, "but I am willing to accompany you to your son if you like." Care replied that she would like nothing better. When Jam11 came to Abu Bakr's house and saw his condition, she began to curse his assailants. She said, "I swear by God that the community that has done this is a community of shameless heathens. God will surely punish it for its sins." But Abu Bakr had no patience for such things. "Tell me," he said, "how is the Prophet?" Jarnil cautioned him that his mother was listening. When Abu Bakr assured her that it was not necessary to observe secrecy in the presence of his mother, she disclosed that the Prophet was safe at the house of Ibn Arqam. Abu Bakr, thereupon, declared that he would neither eat nor drink until he had joined the Prophet. They waited for the darkness of the night to deepen and, when it was safe enough, Abu Bakr was taken to the Prophet by his mother and Jamil. Alone, he then took his meal. 101-711 Advent the Prophet 55 During the Battle of as the news circulated that the Prophet had been seriously wounded, a woman whose brother, father, and husband had been killed in the battle that very day forgot her own sorrow and rushed to the battlefield shouting, "How is the Prophet?" People assured her that by the grace of God he was safe, but she refused to be commort until she had actually seen him. She was taken to him. 11 and she saw him. She said, "No calamity is a calamity if you Arsuf." 102 Khubayb. May Allah be pleased with him, when about to be put to death by his persecutors, was asked, "Don't you wish now that Muhammad were in your place?" He cried out, "I would not like to be released on the condition that he may be given even a pinprick." 10-3 On the battlefield of Cl.Rnd, the Prophet dispatched Zayd ibn Thabit to convey his greetings to Sad ibn Rabi and inquire how he was feeling. Zayd made a long search among the dead and the wounded and came upon Sad just in time, for he was dying. He had received about 70 wounds. Zayd hastily delivered the Prophet's message. Sad replied, "Pay my respects to the Prophet and tell him that I am smelling the sweet smells of paradise, and to my community of an Ar say that if anything happened to the Prophet while even one of them lived, they will 1ld not escape divine wrath." Upon saying this he died. Rn4 Again on the battlefield of Ul-Md, there was an occasion when the Prophet's life was greatly endangered. Without a moment's hesitation, Abu Dujana exposed his back to shield him, a noose pierced his body but he did not flinch. The Prophet's wounds were sucked in by Malik al-Qudri. The Prophet told him to spit out the blood, but he declined, saying, "By God, I am not going to spit it on the ground." 106 Abu Sufyan, when he came to Medina, went to meet his daughter, Ayabibah, who was married to the Prophet. He was about to sit on the Prophet's bed when she hastily rolled it up. Abu Sufyan was taken aback at this treatment and sarcastically remarked, "Daughter, I could understand whether I was not worthy of the bed or the bed was 56 slam anno tll, j world not worthy of me." "No," his daughter explained, "the thing is that it is the Prophet's bed and you are an unclean infidel." R07 The love and reverence shown to the Prophet I.F. by his followers is also apparent from the statement made by Urwat ibn Masih 1d Thaqafil before his brethren Quraysh on his return from Hudaybiyah. He said, "I have seen many monarchs. I have been in the courts of Caesar, Khusrau and Negus. I can swear that I have not seen any king held in greater respect by his subjects than Mullah Nunayd is by his companions. By God, when he gives an order, they all rush to carry it out. When he performs the 108 they nearly come to blows in the scramble for the water he has used for it. When he speaks, a hush overtakes them. So excessively do they revere him that they dare not raise their eyes in his presence to obtain a full view of him." 109 Unprecedented obedience. Because of their unprecedented devotion to the Holy Prophet, the companions never spared themselves in his service. The declaration made by Saad ibn Muadh on behalf of the Ansar just before the Battle of Badr illustrates beautifully the boundless loyalty of these worthy Muslims. "I declare unequivocally," it reads, "on behalf of the Ansar, that you may stay wherever you wish, establish or break relations with whomsoever you like, and take away from our possessions whatever it pleases you to take away and leave whatever it pleases you to leave. What you will take away will make us happier than what you will not. We shall not deviate from the path of loyalty, come what may. We shall follow you even if you march up to Burke Gomden, and were you to plunge your horse into the sea, by God, we, too, shall jump into it." And such obedience did his word command among his people that when he proclaimed the social boycott of the three Muslims, who had held themselves back from the Battle of Tabuk without valid reason, the whole of Medina at once turned into a dead city for them. One of the defaulters, Ka'bi, gives the following account of the incident. "The Prophet had prohibited social intercourse with us. People began to avoid our company. Their entire attitude towards us was 111 advent of the Prophet 57 changed. The very earth seemed to have shrunk upon us. It was no longer the place we knew. When things became unbearable, I, one day, betook myself to Abu Qatada's garden by jumping over its wall. Abu Qatada was my cousin, my uncle's son, for whom I had the greatest affection. I greeted him, but he did not return my greeting. Then I asked him, 'Tell me, for the sake of God, don't you know that I love God and the Prophet?' He remained silent. I implored him in the name of God to answer my question, but again there was no reply. On being pressed by me for the third time for a reply, he said, 'God and the Prophet know better.' Tears welled up in my eyes at this answer and jumped over the wall and came out of the garden." Another incident in Ka'b's life is worth mentioning here. While the Holy Prophet was enraged on some account, a messenger brought Ka'b the Prophet's order that he was to stay away from his wife. "Shall I divorce her?" asked Ka'b. "No," the messenger replied, "only keep away from her." Ka'b sent his wife away to her parents to wait there until the final settlement of the matter by the Almighty. During his social boycott, Ka'b received a letter from the ruler of Ghassan, which read as follows: "We have come to know that your master has withdrawn his favors from you. God surely did not send you into the world to suffer disgrace and be left to rot. Come to us. We shall treat you with great honor." Ka'b did not hesitate. After he had read it, he said, "It is also a part of my trial," and threw it into the fire. That was the end of it. 111 The spirit of loyalty enforced by the Prophet in his followers enabled them to overcome the most deep-rooted evils in their midst. A word from him was sufficient to enforce total prohibition. It is related by Abu Burda from his father, who says, "We were having a drinking party. I rose up and left for the Prophet's place to pay my respects to him. On the way I learnt that the following verses had been revealed, announcing total abstinence. 0 Ye who believe, intoxicants and gambling, dedemption of stones, and divination by arrows, are an abomination of 58 Islam act the world Satan's handiwork, avoid such abomination, that ye may prosper. Satan's plan is to excite enmity and hatred among you with intoxicants and gambling, and hinder you from the remembrance of God and Jairam prayer. Will ye 1101 then abstain? Holy Quran, Al-Ma'idah 590 I returned to my friends and recited the verses to them up to, will ye not then abstain? Some of them were holding glasses in their hands which had been partly emptied. They stopped at once. The wine that had passed through the lips but had not yet been swallowed was spat out. 112 The loyalties of family, friends, and tribe faded before this loyalty. It is stated that the Prophet once summoned Abdullah, son of Abdullah ibn Ubay, and spoke to him thus, "Do you know what your father says?" Abdullah replied, "May my father and mother be a sacrifice unto you." 0 Prophet of God, what does he say? He says, said the Prophet, that if I return to Medina, he who was honorable would turn out him who was debased. On hearing this, Abdullah exclaimed, "He is right. You are honorable and he is debased. You come to Medina by all means. It is well known there that no son is more obedient to his father than I, but if it be the wish of God and his Prophet that I sever my father's head, I am ready to do so." The Prophet bade him not to do so. On reaching Medina, Abdullah positioned himself at the city gate, sword in hand, to await his father's arrival. As soon as Abdullah saw his father, he roared, "Was it you who said that if the Prophet had returned to Medina, he who was honorable would turn out him who was debased? You will soon learn who is honorable and who is debased. By God, you cannot live in Medina now without the permission of God and his Prophet." Abdullah ibn Ubay was stunned when he heard these words from his son, and he began to wail. "Do you hear, 0 men of Hazraj, my son hinders me from returning to my home. Do you hear, 0 men of Hazraj, my son hinders me from returning to my home." But his son the adjutant of the Prophet 59 did not relent. "As surely as I believe in God," he said, "you cannot enter Medina unless the Prophet allows you." People tried to intercede, but in vain. At last the Prophet it was informed. He sent word to Abdullah to let his father come in. Then Abdullah yielded, saying, "Now that the Prophet's permission has come, he can enter." 11 Three new men, a new ummah. Thus it was that the most stupendous change in human history was brought about. The Prophet had uncovered rich treasures of human material that had been lying dormant under the mass of ignorance since the beginning of creation, and imparted to them the light of genius which was to hold the world spellbound through ages to come. He had made into men what until then were mere herds of dumb-driven cattle. He had aroused their innate possibilities, he had released the fountains of their real life and elevated them to be the standard bearers of light, learning, faith and culture in the world. Within a short span of time the desert of Arabia threw up mighty personalities whose names illuminate the pages of history to this day. Umar, who used to graze his father's camels, suddenly rose to dazzle the world with the sublimity of his character and grandeur of his achievements. He humbled the empires of Caesar and Chosroes and perfected the foundations of a dominion which spread over both and was vastly superior to Tlm in governance and organization. Nothing need be said of his widely known moral sense, justice, and righteousness. Another example is Khalid ibn al-Walid. He was an enterprising young Qurayshite who, having earned some renown in local feuds, was held in high esteem by the tribal warlords but enjoyed no distinction in the peninsula, for he had no great achievements to his credit. But after embracing Islam he shone in the world as the sword of Allah. This sword fell upon Rome like lightning and his brilliant conquests are recorded in history. Abu Ubaidah commanded small detachments of Muslims in the early wars. He then assumed supreme command of the Islamic forces 60 Islam and the worried and dejected Heraclius forever from the land of Syria. Heraclius cast a parting glance at it and said, "Adieu, Syria, we shall not meet again." Amribn was noted among the Quraysh. His sagacity. He traveled to Abyssinia to plead with the Negus to hand back the Muslim emigrants to their tenanters. He is known as the conqueror of Egypt. Sadibn Abi Waqsa was unknown as a soldier before he became Muslim. He then captured the keys of Madain, annexed Iran and Iraq to the Islamic dominion and is recorded in history as the conqueror of Ajam. 24 Salman the Persian, the son of a village priest, left his bourne and suffered many trials and tribulations until he reached Madinah and embraced Islam. He then returned to the country of his birth as its governor. But this high honor made no difference to the simplicity of his nature. He still lived in a modest cottage and was often seen carrying loads on his head. Bilal, the Abyssinian slave, acquired such eminence that even Caliph Urner addressed him as his master. Zayd ibn Laritha commanded the Muslim army in the Battle of Ta. The army included men of the merit and valum of Jafar ibn Abi Talib and Khalid ibn al-Walid. His son led another army which had in it such outstanding men as Abflo Dakra and Umar, Abu Dar, Miqdad, Abu Darda, Amr ibn Yasir, Muadh ibn Jabal and Ubay ibn Ka'bi, after embracing Islam, became renowned ascetics and excellent scholars. Al-One ibn Abi Talib, Aisha, Abdullah ibn Mas'udi, Zayd ibn Thabit and Abdullah ibn Abbas ascended to the highest pinnacle in the world, a man who had often through sitting at the feet of the Prophet not been tutored by any mortal. They fountainheads of knowledge and wisdom. The world now listens to these sons of the desert. A well-blended body of men. Indeed, never before had a more harmonious body of men appeared on the stage of history. They were equipped with every requisite for 11 IEA. The Prophet 6I success in both worlds. These men produced the blueprint of a culture and a dominion which, within a remarkably short time, rose to be highly influential over 3 large continents. It was a mine of talent which sent forth an endless stream of men of quality and ability, including wise rulers, honest administrators, impartial judges, prayerful leaders, pious army commanders and God-fearing scientists. Owing to the peculiar mental upbringing of the Muslims and the ceaseless propagation of Islamic ideals among them, the Islamic Commonwealth was steadily supplied with earnest and God-fearing servants. The responsibilities of the government were revested in those who preferred the dissemination of truth to the collection of revenue, and who possessed a correct understanding of the organic relationship between religion and life, and knew how to coordinate the world of faith with the world of practical affairs in such a way as to make life full and righteous. Under the stewardship of these men the civilization of Islam unfolded in its full majesty and the blessings of the faith sprang into life in a manner never witnessed before. The Holy Prophet applied the key of messengership to the lock of human personality and it opened up, laying before the world all the rich treasures with which God had endowed man. He cut asunder the mainsprings of ignorance and brought its power to dust. He forced, with divine power, the then benighted world to march on a new highway of life. He inaugurated a fresh era in the annals of mankind, the Islamic era which will shine forever in human history.